What up, YouTube fam? Talk back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about panel lights again. Now, if you watched my last video, you saw a full photo shoot where I used this panel light. This is the Pixel P80 60 watt RGBW panel light that Pixel sent me to test out. And I have to say, I really love this light. Now, this is not a video about me talking all about this light. This is a video about how you can soften the light from a panel light. Now, a lot of people like the ease of panel lights, but they don't necessarily love the harshness of panel lights. And you really have to take into account that most panel lights are going to be a small light source relative to your subject. So they're really good at casting light, but they're not necessarily the best at yielding soft light. Now, this particular panel light does have a diffusion on the front of it, which is nice, and the light that comes off of this is relatively soft, but it's a small light source, so it's only going to be so soft in comparison to us. So in this video, I want to give you a couple tips or ways that you can soften the light and make the panel light work better for you. So let's get into it. So first things first, I want to talk about proximity. When you're using a panel light, it's going to work best if you can have the light as close to your subject as possible. With it being a smaller light source, the further away you have it, of course, the smaller it's going to be relative in size. Therefore, the harsher it's going to be, the harder that light is going to be. So the closer you can have it to your subject, the better. I'll move it in close here. Okay, so you can see, and it might be really bright. Let me meter this. Boom. Okay, so there we are. We're at 45%. And we're getting 2.8. So as you can see, having the panel light right on Quinn, the light looks pretty good. It's fairly soft for what it is. When you take into account the size of the head versus the size of the panel light, it's a good relative size. But as I start to pull it away, and if I put it back in the position where it was, and I'm sure I'm gonna have to go back up to 100%, so I'm just gonna take it back up to 100% here. And then if we meter this again, so we're at 3.2, so it's a little bit hotter, but you can see that the light is a lot harder when it's further away. So of course, the first thing you can do is have this panel light as close to your subject as possible. If you're doing headshots, that's easy. If you're doing more half body, 3/4, something like that, first of all, that's tough to do with just a panel light because it is so small, it's not gonna have a wide spread of light. But if you have to pull it back far enough to light more than just headshot, you're gonna run into that light being harder. So that takes us into the first thing, adding in a diffuser. This is just the insert of a 5-in-1, and this is a great way to do two things. Diffuse the light, obviously, because this is a diffuser, but because we are essentially making the light source larger, we're increasing the relative size of the light source. Of course, the light source itself is the same, but we're increasing the relative size. That is going to make the light softer. Now, when it comes to using a diffuser, the thing that you definitely want to make sure that you keep in mind is that you want to have distance in between your light and whatever you're using to diffuse. If I have this diffuser right on the light source, it will be diffusing the light, but the light is going to essentially be equally as hard because I'm not giving the light enough space to spread out, because again, there is that diffusion panel on the front, so it is being diffused. But because it's so close, I'm not giving that light enough space to spread out to light this entire diffuser. So you want to have space in between your light source and your diffusion, so that way you are making that light source bigger, okay? So if we come in here and we bring that, and I'll meter again here, and I'm sure I'll have to increase the ISO on my camera there. So 2.5, so I actually only lost about 1/3 of a stop, which isn't bad. So that still looks still looks pretty good, so I won't adjust anything. But you can definitely see that in bringing in this diffusion, it makes the light softer because we've increased the relative size of it. Now, something to just keep in mind, which is just a side note, when it comes to using diffusions, if you watched my last video, you may have noticed in the images that I was putting on the screen, which were completely unedited images, you may have noticed that there was kind of a weird shadow light pattern on the background. And the reason for that was because I used this circular diffuser. So there were parts where this was essentially casting a shadow on the backdrop. So if you're going to use a diffuser, I actually recommend that you use a rectangular diffuser versus the circular ones. Now, typically to have the rectangular ones, they're going to be your bigger 5-in-1s, but ideally you want to use that because then it'll get rid of most of those shadows. But if you are going to use the circular one, just kind of keep in mind your placement of it so that your diffuser isn't casting a shadow on your background. If you care about that, you might not care, and that's fine if you don't. So the first thing you can do, put a diffusion in between your light and your subject. So the second thing you can do is you can bounce the light. Now, the benefit of bouncing the light, there's really two main big benefits. Number one, you can kind of bounce it off of a wall, so you don't need anything extra. And then number two, you can have a bigger source. So in using, the insert in a 5-in-1 reflector, you're limited to the size of that inside reflector. Whereas if you're using something like a wall or a V-flat or something really big, you can make that light source even bigger. And if we know about soft light and we know what makes light soft, the bigger the light source relative to our subject, the softer that light is going to be. So bouncing it is a really great option. Now, of course, you're going to be somewhat limited because continuous lights are not going to be as powerful as flash. Some of them, there are very powerful panel lights, but this is a 60 watt. So there's only so much power here that I have to work with, especially when I'm shooting during the day again, and I'm trying to cut out some of the ambient. You only have so much power. So of course, as you bounce, it's going to take some power to get it bounced into this whiteboard and then back on our subject. But it definitely yields really soft light. So right now I'm getting 2.2. So that's about a half a stop, 2/3 of a stop, somewhere around there under the 2.8. So of course I would have to just take my ISO up because I'm at 100% on this panel light. But it will allow me to get much softer light by just bouncing it. So use the white side when you bounce, or use something, if you're using a wall, just make sure it is a neutral color. White, gray, and your tans work really well. Tan will warm up the light a little bit, so that can be very pleasing on the skin. Obviously white is white. Gray also will warm up that light a little bit. Anything other than that, you're going to get a color cast. So if there's a color off of what you're bouncing, you're going to bounce that color onto your subject. So unless you want to be creative and that's what you're looking for, definitely make sure to keep whatever it is you're bouncing your light off of a neutral tone. Now this last option is a bit unconventional. You're bouncing, but if you want a little bit more control over your bounce, now when you're bouncing it off of a whiteboard or a wall or something like that, it's kind of like using an umbrella. The light is really going all over the place, and that may be okay, but if you want a little bit more control over your light, you can bounce the light into a modifier. Now, I will say this is the least efficient method in bouncing light or diffusing light. So you definitely will have to compensate either via flash power or via your settings. But the good thing about using this is that it really channels that light. So instead of having the light bouncing all over the place, it's bouncing within this modifier the way it normally would if you were using a modifier, and then it's coming back out. Now, you do have to play around with placement. Again, I'm limited in where I can put things in the room that I'm in right now, so I kind of have things cramped in. So you do have to play around with placement, and angle is going to be important as well. So you really have to have everything angled in the right way to make sure you're getting the bounce where it needs to be and you're bouncing in the most efficient way. So overall, this is not an efficient way to bounce, but if you want to use a panel light and you want to bounce that light, but you want more control, you don't want it going all over the place, this is a good option. This is more of a specialized option, but it is an option. Now, of course, I didn't mention, but you could absolutely shoot this through an umbrella. That's definitely an option. That is very similar to using a 5-in-1 reflector. The only reason that I like using the 5-in-1 reflector insert over an umbrella is just because it doesn't use as much space. It's really flat. So I can get it in nice and tight and close to my subject versus with an umbrella, with it being rounded, it just takes up more space. So it's easier to use the 5-in-1 reflector, but an umbrella is an option as well. So hopefully this video has been helpful and it shed some light on how you really can maximize panel lights. Panel lights are very good options for lighting things because they're small, so portability is great. They're easy to set up and you can take these things on location and they're just a lot easier to deal with over your big continuous lights or even setting up a bunch of flash stuff. For running gun stuff, these things work great. So if you maximize on what these things are good at and you utilize one of these methods to soften that light, you really can get some great images using this panel light. So again, this is the Pixel P80. If you're interested in a panel light, I would definitely recommend this light. I have a link in the description to it, which if you use that link, I do get a small commission, but it doesn't change the price of the product. So you can help me get stuff that I invest back into this channel if you buy the light and use my link. So I would greatly appreciate that. So as always, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching it if you've made it this far. If you would, please give this video a thumbs up. It definitely helps the video, helps my channel. And if you like this content and you want to see future content, because I have a lot of things coming to the channel in the future, go ahead and subscribe, ring that notification bell. Like I said, as always, I appreciate you. I appreciate your viewership. I appreciate you supporting me and supporting my channel. So until the next video, take care.